Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my good co-host Dylan. But making his triumphant return to the PJ's Cast after almost 3 years is Will Scouch. How's it going, Will?
Oh my God, 3 years? I didn't know it was that
Mm-hmm.
long. My God. I'm doing well. I'm older and wiser, I guess. At least I like to think so. But yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a while. How you been? How are things?
Yeah, like as we were saying before, keeping busy, that's for sure.
Yep.
And we're at the time in the NHL season. The Four Nations is over. Things are starting to pick up. There's some trades. Being Blackhawks fans, like we brought up the last time we had you on was 2022. Blackhawks fans, we've gone through a lot, not a lot of winning, but a lot of change. Like
A
we
lot.
interviewed you, we interviewed you on the eve of the 2022 draft, and I remember we were asking questions like, "Oh, who could, be like a second round pick the Blackhawks could
Right.
target?" And then like a couple hours leading into that draft, they traded Alex DeBrincat for the seventh overall pick on the draft floor. Were you in the building for that draft?
Yes, I actually was. I was in the building for that one. It was insane. Like in Montreal. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Montreal fans, you can't complain for a millisecond about how much they love everything to do with hockey. I remember what I will never forget about that event was when around the first couple of picks were going off and like
Mm-hmm.
Slavkovsky was doing his rounds around the Bell Center and doing interviews and stuff and shaking hands with people. There, I could have sworn I saw a cloud of like sweaty air hanging in the top of the stadium from like all the people just like being sweaty and it was crazy in there. But it was actually funny you mentioned the Alex DeBrincat trade. I was actually in a cocktail bar when the trade came down. And it was funny because you could hear, because everyone there was there for the hockey, right? So you could hear
Mm-hmm.
table by table people slowly looking at their phones or getting notifications and going,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay."
Yeah,
So
that was
it was it
basically
was
us.
it was a fun week. But yeah, that feels like a long time ago now. But oh yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, I remember seeing some Shane Wright Habs jerseys. That
Yeah,
it's been
yes, there were some of
interesting.
those.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how the 2022 draft has like played out because there wasn't the consensus overall, and obviously when Yuri Slavkovsky was picked first overall, there was a lot of like audible gasps. But then once Slavkovsky went up to the stage, started shaking hands,
Oh
Habs
yeah.
fans warmed up to it, and like to further your point about Habs fans, that was the first draft after COVID, and that crowd was just rabid. I can't even imagine what the atmosphere would have been like in Montreal for that Canada US game. Like
Oh my god.
Montreal truly is different, I think,
Yeah.
compared to the rest of NHL fan bases, whether that's for better or for worse, because, if Montreal ever goes and wins the cup again, they're going to be riding. If
Oh
they lose, they're going to be riding. Like, they're going to be riding regardless.
yeah, the city will melt. It's gonna descend into the St. Lawrence River. It's just we're never gonna
Yeah.
see it again. But no, I got nothing bad to say about Habs fans. It was a great time being there, and yeah, I mean, I agree. It's been interesting watching that class evolve and come along as they have. Like, I mean, Shane Wright this season has been really great. At least whenever I've seen the Seattle team this year. But yeah, I mean, looking like a decent crop of players coming out of that group so far, and it's been really nice. That's been the most interesting thing for me about the last like 12 months to 2 years, just being able to go back to these guys from 2020, 2019, 2021, and see where they've gone, who's sort of achieved things and maybe who's still on the way or maybe who might not get there, and just see why that might be. Like, that's been very interesting for me. So yeah, a lot's changed for me, at least in the last few years, for sure.
And I remember like being at that draft when that like three-way trade between the Islanders, Habs, and Blackhawks was announced when Kirby Doc was traded to Montreal for the 13th overall pick. And I remember Dylan, you were talking to some fans behind us. I don't think they knew that much English, and you're like, Kirby Doc, big, good, you'll like him. And
Well, no, the guy
unfortunately,
goes, does he hit? And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah,
I
kind
mean,
of,
it's not in
maybe.
his game, but sure.
Yeah. What did he have for breakfast? I don't know. Maybe it depends.
Right. Oh man. What a
And if
great.
I'm
That,
being honest, like I think that's a trade that's aged well for the Blackhawks and maybe not so much for the Habs, especially like Doc unfortunately just cannot stay healthy.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, being Blackhawks fans, like going like making that trip to Montreal was so much fun. And like we got to go interview Emily Kaplan, that was a blast as well. But going in that night, it was like they might move into the first round, late in the first round, and then by the end of it, they had 3 first-round picks. They
Yeah.
picked Kevin Korchinski, 7th overall, obviously Frank Nazar, 13th overall, and then
Yep.
they take on Peter Mrazek and get Sam Renzel, 25th overall, and then they have a bunch of picks as well. And then next
Yeah.
year you get Connor Bedard, and then you get Oliver Moore, 19th overall. That was a pick we really liked, and now we're seeing guys like Nick Lardis in the OHL tear it up. He's on pace for 75 goals. Roman Kantsarov, even though he's kind of cooled down, has had a great season as a young player in Russia. And then you have another 3 first-round picks last year, and they're gearing for another top 3 picks. So yeah, as Blackhawks fans, not a lot of winning, but there's certainly been a lot of change. And
Yeah.
I would even argue like the biggest one happened a couple days ago when they got a Spencer Knight and a first-round pick for Seth Jones, and watching him make 40 saves last night was just so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get to catch that game, but I mean, I don't know. I have all the hope in the world for a guy like Spencer Knight, who clearly has been through a lot in his career. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know Chicago, I mean, Arvid Soderblom, like, say what you will, but like, there's a job opening, I would say, there for someone to maybe take the reins. And if that's going to be Spencer Knight after all this, and I mean, Seth Jones, you probably have your opinions on what Seth Jones was like for you guys.
Yeah, we
and,
went over it last night on the
yeah,
podcast. We tried to be as fair as possible, but
of course.
yeah.
and so seeing a guy like Spencer Knight maybe figure it out and get some time and some rope to play with in Chicago with a young team and help them sort of get to where they need to go. I mean, I'm all for it, right? Like he wasn't gonna get the job in Florida, that's for sure. And so, hopefully this is the start of better things for him for sure.
Good way to start off, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about the Blackhawks. Like, I think that's a good place to start. Frank Nazar has really come up and given this team another dynamic forward outside of Connor Bedard, which they really need. It feels like they have everything like settled. Like goaltending is goaltending, but like looking at them having Spencer Knight, even Artur Soderblom's had a great bounce back year, and then you got guys like Drew Comesso, Adam Guyan in the system. I still would have picked Ivan Demidov over Artem Levshunov, but looking at the defense, they could potentially run with Vlasic, Levshunov, and a Korchinski and a Renzel, and that's not even bringing up guys like Ethan Delmastro and Nolan Allen. I feel like that's all set. Like, to me, they got the hard stuff out of the way. For me, the Blackhawks, all they really have to do now is like go after wingers, because it seems like, yeah, you got Connor Bedard, but you also got Frank Nazar, who's emerged as who could be their second line center of the future. And I think that the stats don't really show just how good he's been. What were your thoughts on Frank Nazar and his draft year, and what has changed with him, would you say, in the last few years since he's been drafted?
Yeah, I mean, I know he had a lot of his fans in his draft year. I think he went around where I would have really sort of thought about taking him. Just a really, the thing that I've watched him for years and really paid attention to him pretty closely, because he's just such a really well-rounded player who brings a lot of. He's a really smart player, but he's also really competitive. He gets up and down the ice really well. He has a good feel for the flow of the game. Pretty good playmaker as well, but he can also score. I think the only thing really that was a bit of a knock about him was he had this sort of competitive style of play and this maybe not lightning quick sort of set of feet under him, and he's not the biggest guy in the world and maybe not the most skilled guy in the world. And so what was his NHL trajectory really going to be? But I think, it didn't take very long for me watching him to go, I think there's going to be something here, middle of the lineup guy who you love to have on your team, maybe not the elite top line forward that he maybe was portrayed to be, but like, I still think he's a very versatile, really well-rounded guy. Like, you give him a few different types of jobs. I mean, he strikes me as the type of player that he can do a number of different things, right? And I think a lot of that stems from just how smart he is around the ice, his positioning, his awareness of space, his timing on his passes. It's all really good. So it's been really nice for me to see him. I watched him in college, and he definitely, I think, took some big steps with sort of the awareness of the game and his hockey sense, I guess you could say there. And then now seeing him with Rockford a bit this season and really just seeing him be a guy who looked very comfortable there. I think he seemed like a very comfortable player in the AHL. So now it's, they're giving him some time in Chicago and seems to be doing all right. I mean, I see Chicago here and there, and yeah, he's looked pretty good and like a guy who is earning his minutes and well on his way to some kind of career. And I think there's a number of things that I think he could hold a job doing for sure.
Yeah, that versatility really is where I think the advantage to his game comes in. He's shown very good signs on the penalty kill in particular, especially with his.
It's like he has a short-handed breakaway every game almost.
Yeah.
And like you said, that goes to his hockey sense. I mean, he just knows where the puck's going to be at certain times, and he knows where to put himself in those situations. And I think once that like mental clock ticks with his shooting a little bit, and that happens with young forwards, where it's like they try to take that extra second to shoot, and you really can't take that in the NHL. I feel like if that can get shaved out of his game, he's going to score a lot more in chances because he gets a lot of high danger chances for the amount of ice time he gets. But for the situation he's been put in, going back and forth, center, wing, just same position as Bedard, where both his wingers are revolving doors every game. I'm very happy with his performance thus far. And, like you said, if he could be a middle of the lineup player, like second, third line center, that's exactly what you need in a situation when you have a Connor Bedard. So, I was very happy when we drafted him on draft night. That was the guy I want. I would have taken him at 7. I was that high on him that year just because I thought the upside was there, but I didn't think this versatility was going to be there. And I think that really started getting developed at Michigan and, at in Rockford, just putting him, like you said, putting him in these different situations and getting to see him succeed. So it's been fun to watch for sure. And that I kind of wanted to ask a question about another person from that draft class, because I think if we look at from year by year, Sam Renzel has taken a step every single year. And he's taken a pretty big stride this year, I'd say. He's getting pretty highly talked about in terms of what he's done at Minnesota, and the numbers speak for it, obviously. But I just want to know what's your take on Sam Renzel's development and kind of where you could see him in NHL level down the line, obviously.
Yeah. I think he's a guy who, it's so funny to me watching Chicago sort of draft and develop their defensemen. And I think, the guy that when I look at a guy like Kevin Korchinski, right, I see a guy who is still figuring it out, still pretty raw, still
only 20.
Yeah, he's still really young, but he's that really lanky, fluid, skilled passing guy who just moves the puck really, really well and has a really good set of feet under him. And when I watched Sam Renzel when he was a draft eligible, I thought very similar things, obviously not to the same level, but he was a very sort of lanky, tall, thin, but really sort of fluid defenseman on his feet. I think generating a lot of speed on his frame at the time was a bit of an issue, and maybe that still is a little bit of an issue, but he just covers ice so well, and has a really good amount of skill. Not afraid to shoot the puck either. I'm not always the biggest fan of point shooting defensemen, but it is something that he's kind of done a little bit more in his game. But he was always a guy to me where I'm sort of sitting there going, yeah, he's probably a guy you leave in college and just let him just play and play and play and just get the reps, playing a ton of minutes. I don't have it in front of me how many minutes he's playing for Minnesota on average. Let me look here. He's playing like 19, 18 minutes at even strength every game. Like, that's a lot of reps, and he's not going to get that in the AHL next year, right? He probably won't. He definitely won't if he makes like an NHL roster, which I don't think he will. So I don't think there's any rush to bring him in. And I just think that the more and more comfortable he gets, the more and more the quicker he gets, and I think the stronger he gets, the better off he'll be. So whenever I've watched Minnesota, I do notice Renzel quite a lot when I see him there. And I think he has done a really good job sort of working on that or maintaining that fluidity in his skating ability and combining that with really good skill level and a bit of a delay game, breaking pucks out and making clean passes and all of those things you need your defenseman to do. So he's been a guy where from the get-go it was, late first round pick, you may get a middle pair guy out of him that sort of leans a little more offensively. You leave them in college because, drafting guys out of high school is never a sure thing, but you don't have to rush them, right? You just leave them there, let him sort of play more and more and more and more. And next year, if he's a premier NCAA defenseman, if he isn't already with Minnesota, then you can think about maybe bringing him in because, I don't think there's any reason to rush him based on how he is as a player, but he has come along quite a bit, which is really, really nice to see for me. Because I was a fan of him in his draft year. I thought he was a little bit of a ways off, but if he hits, he could be a really, really, really interesting offensive defenseman for sure.
And like you said, he wouldn't get those minutes in Rockford until Lev Shunov graduates. So that's just the reality of the situation. And it's how it should be. Lev Shunov should be the guy playing 24, 25 minutes a night in Rockford, preparing for when he gets to the NHL level. But like you said, if he hits, that it makes that defensive core just that much more versatile because Vlasic's developed at a very steady rate. Like you said, if Korchinski can find those raw points in his game and refine them, he could be a very good puck moving defenseman in this league. They're just going to have a lot of options on that back end, which is something that I think they have a great fortune of. And a couple of these guys, they probably didn't even see that with that much. Especially, guys like Wyatt Kaiser, who seem like they could be a good third pairing defenseman. Ethan Del Mastro's played pretty good in the NHL level this year, better than I expected at least. And Nolan Allen,
Seth Jones gone now.
yeah.
Who wants a job, right?
Right,
here it is.
Yeah. Everyone's getting ice time and they're taking advantage of it, which has been fun to see for sure.
Yeah. So, I think overall, I think Chicago's done a really good job. The thing I've liked about what Chicago's done with all of these draft picks they've had is a little bit of everything. They have a little bit of all kinds of different hockey players, right? I don't think you guys did this specifically, but last year I had some Chicago fans in my show and in my chat going who should Chicago aim at? What type of player, if you were the king of the world there, would you be aiming for? For me, it was Ivan Demidov was the easy decision for me. But beyond that, I kind of just went, they have a little bit of everything. If you draft another defenseman in the first round, for example, then I totally see why, right? They've done it a lot, but they have some bigger physical guys. They have some maybe more skill focused guys. They have, these more mobile 200-foot guys. And up front, they have, smaller, energetic, speedy guys, bigger, energetic guys. They have, full-on speedsters. They have really high skill finishers. They have all kinds of different player types, in a solid amount. So you could kind of go with the flow a little bit and see who you come out with, right? And just adds to the stable. And I don't think many teams really have as much of a balanced group of players in their stable on the way, which in a sense I think you need. So for me, watching Chicago and see where they've gone and who they've drafted and where their draft picks have come from and how they've developed over the last few years, that's been the really, really fascinating thing for me with this team, because they've drafted a lot. And, if I were in the driver's seat, I think things would look very different, but I'm not saying that would be I'm not saying it would be a good thing. I'm
Taking
just
Leo
saying,
Carlson first overall.
Would be
Get excited.
right,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, Connor Bedard, no.
Dmitry Semashev, first overall.
Yeah,
Let's go.
first overall, exactly. No, but I just mean I probably would in some areas looked a bit different, but I still look at what they've done and all of the picks they've used and look at how they've looked at the group of players they've amassed. And I'm going, I've seen a bunch of these guys before, and there's not very many where I looked at them and went, yeah, I don't see how this is going to work out. I don't really see anything with this guy that I think is potentially an NHL job, pretty much, at least in the first few rounds. And I think that's a very good sign. And I'm hoping that we're starting to see the sort of upswing for Chicago to start using these younger players and get some good results and see them wherever they may go from here.
100%. Yeah. They're in a really good spot right now. I think, like you said, that versatility has been very nice to see them draft. Like you said, they do draft a lot of small, energetic forwards, but they're all good at different things, which I think is very useful. Like you said, they have a couple of good finishers in the system. You have a Nick Lardis, you have a Gavin Hayes in there, people who have shown that goal scoring potential in the past. And, you have great guys who show a great two-way game. I think of Merrick Van Acker, his tool set is so versatile for the NHL level if he can get the proper development curve. And there's just so many intriguing prospects like that. You look at Sasha Boisvert, his game could be very versatile in terms of playing anywhere in the lineup potentially with the way his ceilings looked at times. It's a very interesting situation, and I know Pierce kind of wanted to talk about where the Hawks are going to be picking, so I'll let him take the floor there.
Yeah, I kind of just want, like, since we're kind of on the topic of the Blackhawks farm system right now, I want to ask about Oliver Moore, because I remember in the draft year we were also very big fans of Oliver Moore. We've seen the video of Kyle Davidson, like, just pure exhilaration.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to trade up and get Oliver Moore, couldn't make it work, but he fell into their lap anyways, and just like from that draft class, he was easily like the best skater. Like, he was ranked right at the top for being the best skater, fastest skater, and obviously the Blackhawks love that. And he definitely projects as a guy who can play in the NHL. To me, the question is, like, how much offense can he provide, and can he be a top six guy, or is he more like a third line center, which I mean is perfectly fine. Like, he could be a guy who's on your penalty kill and maybe on your second power play. It's just a wonder of how much offense could he maybe provide.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to push me very hard to say good things about Oliver Moore, right? Like, I've been a huge fan of him for a really long time. You know, even going back to when he was 17 and just seeing 16, even when he was with the under 17 team. You know, you just saw such a special talent there with him. Just such a gifted skater, and a guy who, you know, I love guys where you put them over the boards and you know what you're getting. You know, you know every single shift that he's a guy who's going to play with speed, play with intensity, you know, cause turnovers, not with the puck, but cause turnovers for the other team, and just drive the bus in the right direction so often. And watching him with Minnesota this year, I mean, you know, the guys he's playing with, I'm not sure are the best matchup for him. I believe when I've seen him, it's largely been Matthew Wood, and I can't remember the other one. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I think with Moore, it's a very much I could see it's hard for me to see him not being an NHL player in some fashion. I feel like his sort of playmaking ability, I think, lends him to maybe being on your second line somewhere. But a guy like that, to me, as an excellent sort of third line center, does not really seem that crazy to me. I look at him and I go, yeah, like, the thought to me was, in an ideal world at the end of the day, you know, yeah, Connor Bedard's a really gifted skater, but like, what about Oliver Moore up the middle of the ice with Bedard on the wing? And you can sort of alleviate Bedard's defensive responsibility because Moore can do that. And those two guys kind of fill in the gaps for each other, but have the skating ability and the speed to sort of go on rushes together and play together on the, you know, on offensive situations. And Moore is a bit more of that playmaking driving player, whereas Bedard has a playmaking streak to him as well, but his finishing ability is really kind of what his bread and butter historically has been. So I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with him. Again, like, does he go back to university for another season? I could see it, you know, and just really, you know, play even more and take even more of an important role on that team. Like, again, we were talking about Rinzel up near 18 and a half minutes at even strength of game. Moore is down around 13, 14, which is still sizable, but, you know, there's room for him to be really dependent on there. And I feel like that might be something I would think about. But at the end of the day, I'm a real optimist about him. I think there's a lot to write home about. I think if you look at just at his point production, you might go, you know, I think you might be a little mistaken if you sort of look at that and go, well, maybe he won't be a high end offensive player in the NHL, because I don't know, if I'm coaching him, I always think about if I'm coaching guys like him, and I go, I don't really, like, there aren't that many notes, right? Like, sometimes he can skate himself into pressure and cause turnovers or take shots from the perimeter where he definitely shouldn't be doing that. But at the end of the day, like, the important stuff is what he's really good at, which is sort of getting turnovers in the defensive zone, turning the puck around, getting it up the ice, setting up in the offensive zone. You know, offensive zone turnover generation is super important. He's got the speed and the tenacity to do it all, and I think he just checks so many important boxes for me that, yeah, I'm not super concerned about him at all, and I can see why Kyle Davidson. I saw that video too. I could see why Kyle Davidson is doing the fist pump, at the table there, because yeah, I mean, really good player, and I think he overcomes whatever criticism there might be from whoever it might be.
We always look, or at least for me, like I'm always looking at because the NHL is such a copycat league. It's like, okay, what players could they be comparable to from like recent cup winning teams? And I just think of Vegas, like, oh, could he be like, I don't know, William Karlsson or a Chandler Stevenson when he was on Vegas? Like, not gaudy point
Yeah.
totals, but if he hits 50, even 60 points and like is just a speedster who can play in your middle six, maybe sometimes on your first line of pinch, maybe go to the wing, but play center. Like I think you take that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in what I believe to be playoff style hockey being really important to look for in the draft. Like I think you want guys like a Chandler Stevenson because they have such high levels of intensity in their game, but they also have the skill to sort of, it's not just a thing. It's not enough for me, at least, to like hit a guy in the boards and erase them from the puck, right? You have to somehow gain possession of it, create a little bit of room for yourself, and find a way to generate something moving offensively, right? Like a bit of skill, a bit of quickness, find a way to do something with that turnover you just generated, rather than just pinning a guy against the boards and sort of grinding the game down and maybe making it into a 50-50 battle. Like if you can quickly get in there and quickly get out while still having that intensity level in your game, then that's super valuable to me. And a guy like Moore does that really well. And I mean, Chandler Stevenson's a name that does come to mind for me as well, where, yeah, you might look at him and go, yeah, he's not an 80-point scorer. He's not a 90-point scorer, but part of that might be who he's playing with, like if you take a Chandler Stevenson and put him on a line with Alex Ovechkin, are you getting a much more productive player out of Chandler Stevenson just by virtue of playing with Ovechkin? Probably, to a certain extent. So it might just be a matter of who he's playing with, because a guy like Moore, I think, does make plays really well, but his real value is that speed in transition, that defensive ability, that ability to generate turnovers. And to me, that's really, really valuable. And so that's why I did and remain a really, really big fan of his.
Yeah, from everything we're hearing, like from Blackhawks beats writers, it's very likely that Oliver Moore and Sam Rinzel, and I've heard Ryan Green, are going to sign with the Blackhawks at the end of the year. I would think they get the Frank Nazar treatment because Frank Nazar signed. I think he played 3 games, but then the following year they were like, okay, you got to have a really good development camp, or else we're starting you in Rockford. And I think that would be the thing with Moore and Rinzel.
Yeah.
Or if not, if they play another year in college, I think that's good as well.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're going to be rushed into the NHL.
I hope not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would take my time with the guys like that,
Yeah, you'd hope
I think
so.
Davidson has shown that he's not going to do that. Like, he might give them a few games, but I don't think he's going to keep any of them up extended.
Yeah.
For an extended period of time unless they've earned it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One more person I have to ask about in the Blackhawks prospect pool before we get on to the 2025 draft is one I think that's caught a lot of people's attention is Nick Lardis. And to me, he's the most intriguing one because all the prospects we've talked about, I think they have a lot of projectability at the NHL level. Nick Lardis is so interesting to me because I feel like he's putting up crazy numbers, but we've seen this before. People with overagers in any CHL league, for that matter, just putting up monster numbers, and then you don't really go anywhere. But I think of a lot of past seasons in the CHL where you'll have those players, but they'll be like 6'5", 200 pounds, just literally bullying people, and like they're already 20 years old. Whereas I look at Nick Lardis, he's sub 6 feet tall, he's sub 200 pounds, and he doesn't turn 20 till I think July. And I wonder, and I wonder, like, what is his projectability? Like, could he be anything at the NHL level? Like, I think he will be an NHL player, but like, how good could he be? Like, is he like more like an Andrew Mangiapane type player where he's kind of in your middle 6, or could he be like I don't know, insert small winger like a Jeff Skinner or like absolute high end like a Jake Gensel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick Lardis is gonna be an interesting one. I'm not ready to sort of anoint him as an NHL player right now. I think Lardis is the type of player who, I mean, he is a target for power play opportunities in Brantford. He plays with a really, really talented playmaking center a lot of the time in Jake O'Brien, from what I've seen. He shoots the puck a ton. And is just
doesn't he have like
what he does.
400 shots or
Something,
something? Like
yeah,
something
like he has
crazy.
some absolutely ridiculous number of shots. I mean, I hope it's 400 because that's awesome. And so for me, though, like my whole thing about him, and I actually went and watched him not too long ago because I have seen a lot of people kind of chattering about him, I guess you could say. And I mean, with me, the thing for him is like he kind of is the type of player where, yeah, if his name came up in the third round, I would, totally understand why. And if someone really, really wanted him, I wouldn't get in the way. But the thing for me was always with him, he's a guy where it's like, once the puck is in the offensive zone, that's really when he sort of comes alive. Like he's a little bit absent from transition and sort of everything that Oliver Moore does, in my view, is like something that kind of is missing from Nick Lardis's game, right? It's not like he's lazy or anything. That's not what I'm saying. It's just he doesn't have that style of play. And that's fine. It's just I think it's more difficult to earn a job in the NHL. Like it is a really fine dividing line. I don't think Lardis is the type of guy who, if he's not on your top two lines, he could maybe become a third or fourth line guy. Like his job in the NHL probably will be go out and score. We might put you on the second power play unit and clap bombs all day, right? Like maybe a Nick Robertson type of player comes to mind. But I look at a Nick Robertson and I go, he scored a ton in junior, but he was a little bit more of a motor guy. Like his energy level is super, super high. And I don't necessarily see that in Lardis, but I do think Lardis just absolutely hammers hockey pucks. And that can work. If you score goals, you can't argue with that. So I can't say it's impossible. I think it'll really come down to opportunity. By the way, I just looked. He has 334 shots this year.
Yeah, that's crazy. I looked that up too, but I didn't want
to. That's insane. So there's
not quite 400, but that's still crazy. Yeah.
So 66 on 334 is almost 20% shooting percentage. So like that is not going to happen in the NHL probably, right? Like not many NHL players do that. But I do think that, it's entirely possible that he carves himself a role, let's say it is on the third line. You've got Oliver Moore doing all the hard stuff. Once the puck's in the offensive zone, just you pass it over to Nick Lardis and Nick Lardis gets a good scoring chance. And maybe Nick Lardis comes out of this looking like a Jeff Skinner where he has a couple of seasons where he really pops. But do you pay $9 million for a guy like that? Probably not. But as an auxiliary goal scorer, yeah, you could probably use a guy like that. So with him, I think, for a guy who shoots as well as he does, I'm not necessarily surprised that at this point in his OHL career, he's just on fire. And with guys like him, I'm always sort of going, you know what? Good for you. This is great, right? Really promising. Obviously, you can't take 70 goals away from someone, but let's see. Let's put him in the AHL. Let's see how he does there. If you're right, and guys like Moore and Rinzel and all these guys are coming to town, and they're more play with the puck everywhere else outside the offensive zone type players, then you go to Lardis to sort of finish the job. That could work. And if it works and you win, then who cares, So we'll see what happens. But he has been definitely very intriguing and extremely productive, obviously, this year.
I'm pretty sure, like, if he doesn't score a goal for the rest of the year, like, he'll still finish goal per game. Like, that's how insane his production
He's
has
almost
been.
there. You're right. He's almost there, yeah.
That's really all the questions I got for the Blackhawk system. Schmitty, I kind of want to hand the floor to you because I've been asking all the questions.
Yeah, so I think it's a good time to kind of transition to the 2025 draft.
Yeah.
I imagine this has been a fun one for you to scout so far, Will, just because I think talk to 5 different scouts, and I think they're going to have 5 different sets of rankings, which is always exciting to hear kind of where everyone stands on at least how the first round's going to shake out. Because I've heard there's a drop off in this draft, and there's always a drop off, but it sounds like this one's a little earlier than most drafts. But as of right now, it seems like the top 4 or 5 is pretty solidified. The one I want to start with is obviously the one that's been basically projected to go first overall as of late is Matthew Schaefer, the defenseman. I've seen his tape. He's looked phenomenal, but I'm just going to be honest. I've never seen a player gain stock after getting injured. So I just want to hear your take on him and kind of where you stand on him in regards to his draft class and maybe some comparables to his game.
Yeah, so right now, I would say that him and Michael Misa are like 1 and 1A to me. Like, you could argue
Taylor versus Tyler. Maybe?
Yeah, like you could argue
Matt
either
versus Michael.
pretty much. You know, maybe more on the level of like a Tavares Hedman level type thing, where you're like, if you took Hedman first overall in retrospect, you probably would also look pretty smart. But John Tavares is also a really freaking good hockey player. So, you know, I think you look at a guy like Schaefer, who I do have number 1, but it's really hard because he has been sick this year and then he got injured. I think he's coming back at some point in the near future. I hope he does, because it would be nice to lay eyes on him a little bit more. But I mean, luckily the broken collarbone thing, like everybody does that and they're fine, right? Like it's not like this is something that's going to threaten his career. And when I watch Schaefer, I just see such a special offensive talent. Like he picks teams apart. He's a gunslinger of a passer. You know, he is just so dynamic and can slice and dice through opponents, like an excellent puck carrier, but also passes the puck really well. You know, pinpoint passes almost all the time, sees his options, sees multiple options, and just is such a solid quarterback for your team from the defensive side of the game, right? Like, I think there are some areas where you can sort of go, you know, like maybe this could be a little bit better, but what he brings to the game is really special. And he's also really young. Like he is very close to being eligible for next year's draft. So to
Late
me,
2007 is crazy, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I know. And he's playing a ton of minutes, and he does not look bad doing it, especially for a guy who had mono to start the year. We've had the pleasure of interviewing him on our channel, and he was great. Like he knows what he's capable of. Like he's not timid about what he thinks he's capable of, but he's a hardworking kid. There's a lot to love about him. It is just really hard. Like for me, I don't think there's a question between him and a guy like James Higgins for me, but him and Michael Misa, based on what I've seen of Michael Misa, I mean, honestly, if I'm you guys, if I'm Chicago, I'm kind of hoping I don't have to make that decision and I just stay at 2.
About that, yeah.
And you just go, I mean, if San Jose gets first overall or whatever, and they want Schaefer, I would think Michael Misa with Connor Bedard on the same team would be stupid. It would be stupid. But if Michael Misa goes first overall and, you know, you guys get the sort of top pair 200-foot, but maybe 60-40 offensive leaning, you know, dynamic offensive guy in Matthew Schaefer, then there's that too. It's just really hard. Like based on what I've seen of him this year, and after having seen him in person a couple of times, obviously there's just not that much concern about how he plays. But Michael Misa's growth has been remarkable this year in his game since last year even. And just seeing, I know it's not very good analysis, but I watch him play and I just go, God damn, that guy's good. Like he's just good.
He's almost as good as Nick Lourdes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's like it's like no matter the situation, no matter what, you know, he is finding a way to score on you. Like he can quarterback a rush, he can give and go the puck to someone else, he goes to the net, he can make plays in scoring areas, he can work along the boards. You know, he does so many things for you that are always going to work. And the only thing that I've found that he doesn't really do is hit guys that much. But like, I don't care. It's not really his job anyway, right? Like You know, like that's what Sam Savoy's for. Just, hey, little kid, go out there and crush everything that moves. You know, that's your job. But with Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer, it's almost like an impossible decision for an individual to make, if you ask me, right? Like, this is why I would want a group of people to sort of all bring a different perspective and a different viewpoint and go, well, we could use this guy. Like, to me, the easy decision would be Michael Misa. But from what I saw of Matthew Schaefer this season, it just sucks that he got injured. But I mean, I think it was very intriguing that the Canadian World Junior team, who had him on the team, looked completely lost and completely listless offensively without him on the team. And that, you know, is that really the biggest is he such a difference maker that losing him like broke their minds a little bit? Maybe. But even if he's close to that as a 17-year-old, I mean, there's a lot to play with there. There's a lot to love. And, you know, I think at the end of the season, especially if he doesn't play a tremendous amount between now and the end of the year, it's entirely possible that I might just go, you know what? I know what I've seen out of Michael Misa. I know what he's capable of. And maybe I just go with something I'm more certain about. But honestly, I think I'm splitting hairs at that point. I think either of them will make extremely talented NHL players for sure.
So in terms of Schaefer's comp, like from everything you said, that sounds like Quinn Hughes. Like, at least in terms of driving offensive play. What would be your direct comp for Schaefer right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go Quinn Hughes, because Quinn Hughes is smaller and more like of a dynamic, mobile skater. Like, Schaefer is more of just a northbound, like, get the puck up the ice, but never dump it type guy. And I'm trying to think of an example in the NHL who's like that. Like, maybe you have like a Morgan Riley on steroids. You know what I mean? Like someone who is an offensive leaning guy. You know, Morgan Riley, when he's given the reins to sort of run a power play and sort of skate the puck himself, he can be really, really lights out. But if you add more, I would say, confidence, like goal scoring confidence and like inside driven scoring to his game, then I think you might get like a Schaefer, where it's, you know, like you watch him and you just go, you know, you got to let him lean a little bit into the offense to get the most out of him, and you have to work around that. But if you do, it's going to be awesome. Like it's really, really interesting. And so, I look at Chicago and I look at the sort of insulation style defenseman that you guys have, and I go, yeah, I think there's names on this roster that could offset a guy like that pretty well, and forwards that work hard enough off the puck to sort of allow him to be a little bit riskier and a little bit more confident, and you go from there and see how it goes. So yeah, I mean, I also kind of feel like, based on what I know of the NHL, he's one of those guys where it might just be, he's just Matthew Schaefer. Like that's his style of play, and that's just what he is, you know. But we'll see. I would love to see him again a couple of times before the end of the year, to say the least, because he's a heck of a player. And the last couple of games I saw of him, he was outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, Pierce and I have been talking about it all year. We've been seeing him rise up the rankings, and we haven't been able to really pick anyone's brain on as to why he's been rising. But from what it sounds like, he just sounds like he can take over a hockey game offensively.
Yeah.
And
You
need a player like that on the team, and to put a defenseman like that with a guy like Connor Bedard, I think that the opportunities are endless in that situation. You know,
yeah,
so
that's about right.
And the same could be said for Misa too. I think Misa opens up this offense to have multiple high-end forwards, and that's why it's like you said, if the Hawks are in second, I don't think they're mad with that. They're going to get someone very good in that situation. But in terms of like the people after that, when you're looking at like a James Higgins, a Porter Martone, and even an Anton Frundell, who do you think kind of separates himself from that little cluster of players right now?
Yeah, I mean, if the Blackhawks stay where they're at, and let's say someone vaults them in the lottery and they end up at like 3, I mean, I think there are 3 guys that could logically come up at that spot that I would be comfortable saying yes to, and that's Higgins, Martone, and Victor Eklund. I think Victor Eklund is also something that I think Chicago could use more of, right? A super energetic and aggressive, just bulldog style player who can also make plays, and drive just really, really good possession results. Like a guy who makes other players better, isn't perfect, but I think moves things in the right direction far more often than he doesn't. With Higgins and Martone, I mean, I think with especially Higgins, I think you see a guy who I'm not totally sold on him being for sure a center in the NHL at the end of the day, but I do think he is a really, really talented playmaking forward who has a good fluid stride to his game, good skating ability, really times his passes really well, puts enough energy behind them to connect. And I think he just drives play really well. And I think he's also gained a little bit more physical confidence this season over the course of the year. He's taking hits a little better. He's, skating and looking off pressure a little bit better, and he's hitting guys a lot more than he was. So that's been nice to see, because I think that's something that he kind of needed in his game to sort of create room for himself and create opportunities for himself. Martone is going to be very interesting, because I came into the season like fully on the Martone bus, right? Like I thought he was a guy who might be the first overall pick. And the more and more that I saw him this year, the more I kind of had to rethink the way he, I've been watching him since he was 16, but his game has kind of not really evolved the way that I thought it might. And the way that he was kind of advertised coming into the season was a little bit hard to level with and sort of understand. But now that I've seen him a little more, I think I've kind of adjusted a little bit, where like the skill and the size is really good. He's a really good passer around the ice, sees the ice really well. And I think that he's a guy who the only thing that I think is an issue is just the speed at which he plays the game. He needs things to sort of go around him at a speed at which he's comfortable, because under pressure, he can, try to skill up the play and try to get through a guy and just not quite get there, but at the other side of the coin, he's one of those guys where when you watch him play, you go, I want to play with this guy. Like, I know he'll be able to find me. I know he's a captain of a pretty good team in the OHL for a reason. Like, he exudes that sort of, I hate to use like intangibles as a word, but he does exude a level of like leadership and like stability when he's on the ice. And I think that there's a lot to that. It's not that he isn't a physical player either. I just don't think that that's a hallmark of his game right now. But again, he's a player who we interviewed, and I'm always really happy when I talk to a player or we talk to a player and he has a really strong understanding of his own limitations, right? Like, he's a guy who's like, I think I'm really good. I think I am really skilled and I can score and I can set up a play. But I also know that I don't really play at a high enough pace to be a top level NHLer right now. I know I need to get quicker. I know I need to get more, like, finish my checks more and like get stronger and really sort of make more of an impact that way. And that's exactly what you kind of hope a guy like that says, because you can kind of tell in his game that that's what's maybe missing a little bit. So any of those three guys, I think you can make a case for. After that point, it does open up real fast. Like, I have a lot of guys ranked pretty high pretty soon after those guys who might be late first round picks in reality, maybe. And I mean, I don't know. Those five guys at the top are all very intriguing for different reasons. The next few, I'd say, are also very solid players, but it really opens up really quickly after that. But I guess if you're Chicago, you don't have to worry so much, right? You only can go down, 2 spots? So you'll get
They're pretty much locked in the top 5. Yeah. If they somehow don't end up with a top 5 pick, then
you'll end up with someone. If I'm you and I'm working for Chicago, I think if any one of those top 5 guys is a Chicago Blackhawk, I and there's even a couple of other guys where if they sneak into that conversation, I would be totally fine with it. But definitely any of those top 5, I'd go, yeah. I mean, great additions to a team that has a ton of young players and a ton of everything. That it just, it becomes an embarrassment of potential riches, so to speak.
100%. And I think that's the exciting part, honestly, is just, like you said, they've kind of spread out what they've drafted to where it's not like they have to get like a power forward. They have to get this. It's like, if that player aligns where they're picking, that they have the luxury of taking that. And I'm not saying that it should be like a best player available approach, but I mean, if he's at the top of your board at 3, take him at 3. You know what I mean? I'm not in a position where I could judge, especially with the track record of how Davidson's guys are starting to come along in development, he's earned the benefit of the doubt on some of these guys, I think, at least for the meantime. Like, obviously, we haven't seen the NHL production yet, but obviously it's 2 years into a rebuild, 3 years into a rebuild. I'm not expecting these guys to jump up as 19, 20-year-olds. It takes time, obviously. But, obviously, like you said, it kind of gets wide open after pick 9 or 10. So, in terms of like going into the back half of the year, who are some guys that you think could be some late risers potentially?
I mean, I feel like in my world, no matter who I say, I'm wrong. Like the NHL finds ways to pick guys and go, yep, you're going to actually go top 5 this year all of a sudden, right? I mean, I don't know. I know there are some players out there that individual scouts or individual teams do have really high. Like, I'm pretty steadfast that if you saw any given NHL team's draft list, you'd lose your mind and go, what in the hell is this? But NHL teams do see things in a very different way from the sort of public groupthink out there. Like, for me, I will be very curious about a guy like Cullen Potter between now and the end of the year, but he's not very big, and I feel like that might be something that just prevents him from being super high on people's boards. I could easily see a guy like Radim Mertka, the defenseman in Seattle, be a guy that NHL teams really start to go, you know what, if Matthew Schaefer's off the board, maybe we just go with the giant Czech kid who does everything perfectly fine, and he's 6'6" every time he steps on the ice, we see a guy like that really jump up the boards. You can't. I mean, I like Mertka. He's pretty solidly in my first round, but like a top 10 pick to me seems a little bit outlandish, but I could see it. I mean, there are also people out there who think the world of a Caleb Desnoyers, a guy who, I mean, if I found out that, like I was talking to Scott Wheeler the other day, and he was saying that he's talked to at least one NHL scout, but I could be quoting him wrong. He said he's spoken to people or someone who thinks more of Caleb Desnoyers than a guy like James Hagens. And if that catches on, and if that sort of snowballs, and for whatever, let's say he goes to the Memorial Cup and has a really productive playoff and maybe they win the whole thing, right? An NHL team might look at that and go, yeah, you know what? Sure. Like, and really just go for a guy like Desnoyers. And I could see that happening. I wouldn't do it, but I could see a guy like that based on how people are talking about him, be a guy who, maybe people have him at 10 going into May, but by mid-June he's at 4 or 3, and I don't know. I think there is a way to frame this year's draft class where any number of guys could be argued pretty much anywhere beyond, for me, like 4, 5. There's maybe 20 guys where I'm going, yep, I could easily see this order being wildly different between now and the end of the season. So I don't know. I'm ready. I'm strapped in. I love when this kind of stuff happens. I love the takes. And yeah, to right off the top, you said this is probably a good year. And it's been fun, like, honestly, for me. The first couple of months were a little scary because I was kind of sitting there going like, okay, like, when are we going to, this is not very promising. And I know for a fact NHL people felt similarly. But the more I look, the more I dig, and the more I watch of some of these guys, I think a lot of them have sort of gotten more comfortable, gotten their legs moving, and I think we're seeing a lot more intriguing players out there. Does it open up really, really fast and sort of become take who you like way quicker than usual? Probably. But I don't know. I'm not one to say that the draft class is bad at the age of 17, right? I think there's a lot of guys that could have things go really well for them. And if it does, we might look back on this draft as stronger than we thought. And there are good players available, as there are every year. So I love the class so far. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, I'm ready for the late season fireworks, because they always exist. The last couple of months, things start to shift pretty quickly, and I can't tell you what's going to happen, and I like to say I'm ready for it, but I don't know. I'm not. I'm probably not.
Oh, it looks like Dylan
Maybe
froze.
the king said no one sees coming.
we're good.
You bugged out for a sec. What was that?
Uh-oh, that's not good. I was literally saying
You're
I'm
good
excited to see who this year's Kakaniemi is.
Yeah, there's one every
Or
year.
Becca
Right?
Seneca.
Yeah, Seneca.
Yeah,
and-
Seneca, literally last year.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like recency bias has played its way a lot in like drafts of years past, and we always talk about like, oh, this year might not be great, but I remember the 2017 class, people being like, oh, it's not that good either. But then, you get Cale McCarr coming out of it,
Yep.
Miro Heiskanen, Elias
Yep.
Pettersson, and I feel like I'm missing a few other names. I remember 2014 was kind of like the same way, like, oh, we didn't really know who was going to go first overall. And then, like, you get David Pasternak going in, like, the late first round, like, Braden Point goes in the third round. Like, you never know how it's going to play out. Like, you got to give it a few years at least.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's my standpoint always is like, just take who you like, and just like you put your faith in the process, right? That's really all you can do. I know it's like very boring to hear that and like very sort of like, oh well, where's the take? But at the end of the day, we're just evaluating athletes and seeing who is capable of what and where to improve things and what they're capable of and what they might be able to do in the future. And but you have to be, you look at things and you just kind of go, yeah, you have to be patient and it also is just a matter of like sometimes good players just go under the radar for one reason or another, and I think there are those as well, right? They might play in Sweden's junior league and not play a tremendous amount of minutes, or they play in the pro division and barely play, and you never really see them, but you only get them at an international competition. There's all kinds of reasons that might cause things, but yeah, it's a good one. It's a good class. It's fun to watch, and I'm curious to see how it goes.
I have one more player to ask about in this draft, and it's mainly because of his name. Like, this guy shouldn't be playing hockey. Like, he should have been starring in movies in the 50s, like opposite of Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn. Like, I have to ask about Roger McQueen. What do you think of him? Like,
oh baby,
he's obviously been injured this year, but do you think he's someone who could potentially go high just because he's a big guy from the WHL? And we know that GMs love that, or is that another guy who might drop out of the first
honestly
round because of his injury?
Yeah, I mean, that's really tough. He's playing tonight, so I'm not gonna, I don't think I'm gonna really care that much about what happens tonight, but I will definitely be watching him over the course of the rest of the year as much as I can. At the beginning of the year, I did not see a tremendous amount there where I was really like, I see why this guy's a top 10 pick, right? And when I talked to NHL people about him, the big thing they all said was like, it's the what if with him. What if it all breaks right? What if he turns out to be this dynamic, middle of the ice, physical center with some skill and finishing ability? Like, what if he turns into that? And I go, okay, I can't argue with that, right? Like, I can't say that that's impossible. But when I watched him, I kind of saw a guy who didn't have the most pace of play in his game. He wasn't the most skilled guy. He's been this big for a long time, and he's a guy who, when I watch him, I kind of think he's a guy who's played and scored a lot because he's bigger than everybody, and he doesn't really have to put in as much as maybe some other players to get the results he gets, which to me doesn't bode super well for the NHL, because I don't think you can get away with doing that. Obviously, I'm not like writing him off right now, but I mean, honestly, like, if there is a player whose injuries do maybe spook me a little bit, it is Roger McQueen. Like, I think NHL teams will get medical reports on him. I've been given some information about his medical situation. It's not awesome. Like, part of what he's dealing with can be chronic pain.
Yeah, we should spend another hour talking about it now.
Well, I'll be quick. Like, it's stuff that could be aggravated with like chronic pain and physical activity. And, like, if you're young, it can affect you more when you're older. Like, this is a thing that, I just kind of go, I don't know. If I wasn't as big a fan of him as other people at the beginning of the season anyway, and I'm reading about the injury that he's been dealing with, and I'm going, if he comes back healthy now, I really better hope that the team that drafts him has a really good medical staff that really knows what they're doing handling this condition, because it just kind of says, like, from what I've been reading, it's just, you just kind of deal with it. You just got to keep doing your training. You got to have physical therapy, all these things. But when you look at the things that re-aggravate it or aggravate it in the first place, there's a lot of sort of things where you go, the NHL doesn't offer that a whole lot. The NHL is pretty likely to cause issues with this. So it spooks me, but we'll see. I don't know. All it takes is one NHL team to disagree and go, our medical team will be fine with it. We think he's going to be great. 5th overall pick. Here we go. Right. Yeah. All it takes is one. Again, like, obviously I'm also, like, not a doctor, but I did do my kinesiology bachelor's degree, and that's not nothing. And a lot of what I focused on was biomechanics and, muscle strain and bone strain and all those forces and all that stuff. And when you have a big boy like McQueen, who's 6'6", and I mean, what's your target playing weight in the NHL, right? 220 pounds at least, maybe. That's a lot of weight on a spinal column, right? Like, that's a lot of mass on a spinal column, and it's going to be physical. His job is going to be physical. And this is a back injury, and, like, back injuries, your vertebrae and your spinal column, it can be pretty sensitive. So I'm a little bit spooked by it, especially because of what I saw at the beginning of the year. But that doesn't mean that he's, like, going to drop down boards. I don't know. If anything, a team is probably going to go, screw it. This draft sucks anyway, so let's take him and see what happens, right? And I would go, all right, fine. I wouldn't do it, but I get it. Fair enough.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on,
Hey,
Will
anytime.
Scouch, giving us all this information from, like, how a player plays to their actual health. Kind of going back to the, like, Misa versus Schaefer debate, Matthew versus Michael, if you will.
Yeah,
I think there's part of me that's like, yeah, if they go to number 2 and the Sharks, like, or however the lottery works out, and they pick Misa first and Schaefer goes second, it's like, well, shoot, I would assume, like, if they pick him second overall, like, he'll be their best defensive prospect. Like, would you rate him number 1 in their system, like, ahead of Lev Shunov?
Oh, yeah, I would think so. I mean, I'm looking at their list now. Like, yeah, I think he clears everybody. I think he clears everybody.
Yeah, and, like, Blackhawks have a bunch of defensive depth, and, notably teams don't like young defensemen, so it'll be hard for the Blackhawks to trade from that and get winger help. So
yeah.
But then part of me is like, I want them to pick number 1 and, like, have the choice and, like, have the courage of their conviction to pick who they want, whether that is Schaefer or Misa. But yeah, right now I would like Misa, because to me, like, I just think he's the most dynamic forward in this class, and I think Dylan shares the same sentiment with me, and you definitely have stated why he is in potentially conversation for first overall.
Yeah. It's a scary decision for me if I'm alone. Like, if I'm alone at the draft table and I got nobody there with me and I have to pick one, I probably pee my pants and run away. So I would want to talk. I would want to talk to people about it and see sort of where everybody comes down, because I'd be very curious to see that, and maybe it's something I should do on my show, is just have a bunch of other dum-dums like me talk head to head about those two players and compare them and watch maybe some video of both of those guys going in and see what happens, because I don't think you could really go wrong, especially because I don't find the injury concerns with Schaefer particularly convincing.
It's just a broken clavicle.
Yeah,
right?
It's a broken collarbone. Like,
we've seen, like Connor McDavid's healed from that. Patrick Kane has, I'm pretty sure. Like, a bunch of, like, yeah.
My dad broke his collarbone playing Superman when he was 7, and he's fine. So I'm sure a professional athlete will be able to recover from a broken collarbone. Yeah, I mean, he should be fine. But I mean, it's just and the other thing too, I will say, is, like, when I go into an NHL season sort of primed to not be on the bus about a player as much as I think I should be. Well, if I go into the season maybe primed to not think as much of a player as other people might think, and then I've watched them a few times and I go, oh, okay, like now I'm starting to see what people are talking about. Oh, okay. Like Michael Neese is a great example of that. And I'm just sort of, the more I watched him and the more time went by, like it's hard to argue against him. And I mean, James Haggins has improved as well, but the 2007 born guys at the top there, it's really hard to argue against those guys. And the other thing to keep in mind, a guy like Matthew Schaefer is pretty much a year older than a year younger than James Haggins and Victor Eklund and Porter Martone. And that also is a big factor, right? Like you're a year behind those guys and he's still that good. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, like I said, I don't want to be making that decision on my own. Luckily, Chicago has a lot of guys in the room, or a lot of people in the room to make that decision.
Yep, good war room that we definitely have gained the benefit of the doubt for sure. And like you said, they're in a pretty good spot. You know, they're going to get one of the cream of the crop of this draft, and at that point, just trust wherever the scouts take them right now. With you know what games they're going to go watch in the final couple months. It'd be, like you said, it'd be nice for Schaefer to get healthy, so you know you can get some physical, actual time on watching him on the ice. But
right.
We'll see what happens for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan, do you got any more questions, or I think we can wrap this up if you don't?
Nah, I'm all good. This has been great. Thank you again, Will, for hopping on the show.
Hey, anytime. It's been a while. It's been too long. It's good to be back. You know, it's always fun talking shop, and yeah, anytime.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, man. We appreciate it.
No problem.